At JFK's bustling international terminal, a gate agent held the power to decide who flies and who stays. When Dr. Lena Holloway, a brilliant scientist on her way to the most important meeting of her life, presented her first-class ticket, that agent made a choice. It wasn't based on procedure, it was based on prejudice. She tore down a black woman's dignity, grounding her with a smug smile as the plane left. But what she didn't know, what no one could have possibly guessed, was that Dr. Holloway had another way to travel. And in less than an hour, the consequences of that agent's decision wouldn't just be knocking on her door, they would be parking a $60 million private jet right outside her window. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low hum of thousands of conversations, the rhythmic clacking of roller bags on polished floors, and the distant electronic chime of a final boarding call all blended into a sound that Dr. Lena Holloway usually found soothing. It was the sound of movement, of progress, of people going somewhere important. Today, however, it was the sound of a ticking clock. Lena stood in the priority boarding line for Transcontinental Airways Flight 112 to Zurich. She clutched the handle of her sleek, graphite-colored carry-on, her knuckles white. Inside her bag was a portfolio containing data that could reshape the future of oncology. In Zurich, a consortium of pharmaceutical executives was waiting. This meeting, the culmination of a decade of her life's work, was scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. There was no room for error. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer, a simple silk shell, and comfortable yet elegant trousers. It was a uniform of quiet confidence she'd honed over years of navigating boardrooms, where she was often the only woman and almost always the only black person. Her hair was styled in neat professional locks, pulled back from her face. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with a purpose and a destination. The boarding line shuffled forward. At the podium stood a woman whose name tag read Brenda. Brenda Jenkins had the weary, perpetually unimpressed expression of someone who had been in her job too long. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe ponytail, and her eyes scanned each passenger with a detached scrutiny that bordered on suspicion. She moved with an efficiency that was sharp, almost aggressive. Her hands snapping tickets and passports with brisk, practiced motions. Lena watched as Brenda processed the man in front of her, a portly gentleman in a rumpled suit who grumbled about the lack of legroom. Brenda offered him a thin, placating smile and a practiced, "Enjoy your flight, sir." Then it was Lena's turn. She stepped forward and offered a polite smile. "Good evening." She handed over her passport and her first-class boarding pass. Brenda took them without making eye contact, her gaze fixed on the computer screen. She scanned the passport, then the ticket. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown line appeared between her eyebrows. Dr. Lena Holloway. "Brenda," said her voice flat. She finally looked up, and her eyes, a flat shade of grey, raked over Lena from head to toe. It wasn't a glance. It was an appraisal. A dismissive one. "That's me," Lena confirmed, keeping her tone pleasant. Brenda looked from the name on the ticket to the first-class designation, 1A, and then back to Lena's face. The gears were turning behind her eyes, clicking through a Rolodex of stereotypes and prejudices. The equation wasn't adding up in her mind. "There seems to be a flag on this reservation," Brenda said, her voice taking on a new, authoritative edge. The detachment was gone, replaced by a focused, accusatory energy. Lena's smile tightened. "A flag, I can't imagine why." "The ticket was booked through my company's corporate travel department, the same as always. All I know is what the system tells me." Ma'am? Brenda replied, the ma'am, coated in a thin veneer of condescension. It requires a secondary verification. I need you to step to the side, please. Lena felt a familiar hot prickle of indignation. She had been randomly selected for extra screening more times than she could count. She had been asked to prove she could afford a luxury handbag while shopping and had been followed by security in high-end department stores. She knew this dance, but today the stakes were too high for a delay. To the side. The flight is boarding. I'm in Group 1. Lena stated, pointing to her ticket. Is there a problem with my identification? I need you to step to the side. Brenda repeated her voice louder now, drawing the attention of the other passengers in line. We have a procedure to follow when a ticket is flagged. The man in the rumpled suit, now a few feet away, looked back with annoyance. A young couple behind Lena exchanged an uneasy glance. The public nature of the confrontation was part of the humiliation, and Lena knew it. It was a power play. Reluctantly, Lena moved to the end of the counter, her heart beginning to pound a frustrated rhythm against her ribs. She watched as Brenda waved the next passenger forward, a white man in a polo shirt, and greeted him with a completely different energy. Welcome aboard, Mr. Anderson. Right this way. Lena stood there isolated and conspicuous as the rest of the priority line boarded. Each person who walked past gave her a fleeting look, a mix of pity, suspicion, and simple curiosity. The clock was ticking, and with every passing minute, the future of her company, Viridian Diagnostics, felt a little more precarious. Brenda was no longer just a gate agent. She was a gatekeeper, and she had just decided for reasons Lena knew all too well that Dr. Lena Holloway did not belong. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The priority boarding line vanished onto the jet bridge, followed by the subsequent boarding groups. The bustling energy around Gate C-26 began to thin, leaving a cavernous silence, broken only by the tinny final boarding announcements for other flights. Lena remained standing by the counter, her posture rigid, her patience fraying into a cold, hard knot of anger in her stomach. Brenda finished with the last of the economy passengers, a family with 3 small, boisterous children. She gave them a forced smile and then turned her full, undivided attention back to Lena. The pretense of customer service was gone. Her expression was now one of open suspicion. All right, Dr. Holloway. She began leaning forward and lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, accusatory tone. Let's talk about this ticket. There's nothing to talk about, Lena said, her voice dangerously calm. It's a valid paid-for ticket. If there's a technical issue, I'd appreciate it if you'd resolve it. I need to be on that plane. The issue isn't technical, Brenda countered, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the counter. The flag on this ticket is for payment verification. A first-class, last-minute, fully flexible ticket to Zurich costs over $14,000. The system is questioning the legitimacy of the purchase. Lena stared at her, incredulous. Are you asking me if I can afford my plane ticket? The question hung in the air, stark and ugly. Brenda didn't flinch. I'm asking you to verify the purchase. Who bought this ticket for you? The implication was clear. You couldn't have possibly bought this. Someone else must have. A boss. A boyfriend. It was a classic line of questioning, designed to diminish and disempower. My company bought the ticket. I am the founder and CEO of Viridian Diagnostics. It was purchased with our corporate account, which has probably bought more first-class tickets on this airline than you've had hot dinners. Lena said the words sharp and precise. Brenda's lips curled into a smirk. Viridian Diagnostics. Never heard of it. Do you have a business card? Lena's jaw tightened. This was theater. Absurd, humiliating theater. She reached into her blazer, pulled out a crisp business card from a silver case, and slid it across the counter. Brenda picked it up, examining the clean, minimalist design. Dr. Lena Holloway, founder and CEO. She turned it over as if looking for a hidden clue, then placed it down. This doesn't prove anything. I could get cards like this printed online for $20. The audacity was breathtaking. Every defense Lena presented was met with another wall of disbelief. Her credentials, her calm demeanor, none of it mattered. Brenda had already cast her in a role, and she was determined to see her play it out. "What exactly do you want from me?" Lena asked, her voice dropping. "Would you like to see my corporate credit card? I used it to pay for the lounge access. Would you like to see the balance on my personal bank account? Because this is starting to feel less like a security check and more like a personal audit." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Brenda's face, but it was quickly replaced by stubborn resolve. She was in too deep to back down now. "I need to speak to the person who authorized the purchase from your company. The transaction was authorized by our CFO's office." Lena explained the absurdity of the situation mounting. "It is 7:30 p.m. on a Friday. They are not in the office. This is a ridiculous request." "Then I'm afraid there's a problem," Brenda said, a note of triumph in her voice. She was winning. She was holding the line. "The only problem here, Brenda, is you." Lena shot back, her composure finally cracking. "You've decided I don't fit your profile of a first-class passenger, and you are manufacturing a reason to deny me boarding. Now I am telling you for the last time, process my ticket and let me on my flight." Her raised voice attracted the attention of the remaining gate staff and a man in a manager's uniform who had been observing from a distance. He began to walk over. Brenda saw him coming, and her expression shifted to one of beleaguered professionalism. She was no longer the accuser. She was the victim of an unruly passenger. "Ma'am, there is no need to be hostile," Brenda said sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern. "I am simply trying to do my job. You are the one who is failing to comply." The manager, whose name tag read Garrett Vance, arrived at the counter. He had a tired, bureaucratic face and the air of a man whose primary job was to make problems disappear with as little fuss as possible. "Is there an issue here, Brenda?" he asked, his eyes flicking from his employee to Lena. "This passenger's ticket has a payment verification flag." Brenda explained, her voice a model of calm reason. "She is unable to verify the purchase and is becoming aggressive." Garrett turned to Lena, his expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we have to follow protocol. If the system flags a ticket, we have to clear it. It's a security measure. This isn't about security. And you know it," Lena said, looking directly into Garrett's eyes. "This is about profiling. Your employee has accused me of not being able to afford my ticket. She has questioned the legitimacy of my company. I have provided my ID, my passport, my business card. I have done everything but give her a blood sample. This is harassment." Garrett's mask didn't slip. "Those are serious accusations, ma'am. Right now, all I see is a ticket with an unresolved flag. Brenda's request to speak with the purchaser is standard procedure in this case. If you can't facilitate that, our hands are tied." He was a wall, a polite, smiling wall of corporate policy designed to absorb and deflect. He stood firmly behind his employee, validating her actions. In that moment, Lena knew she had lost this battle. They were a team united in their conviction, however unspoken, that she did not belong. The jet bridge door was still open, the hum of the plane's auxiliary power unit, a tantalizing sound of departure. But for her, it was a world away. The finality of the situation settled upon Lena like a shroud. The manager, Garrett, stood with his arms crossed, a human roadblock. Brenda was now busy at her terminal, pointedly ignoring Lena, her fingers typing with self-righteous purpose. She was already composing the incident report, framing herself as the diligent employee handling a difficult situation. "So that's it?" Lena asked, her voice hollow. "You're just going to let my flight leave without me?" "A flight for which I have a valid, paid-for first-class ticket." Garrett sighed, a put-upon sound meant to convey how much of an inconvenience this all was for him. "My hands are tied, ma'am. Policy is policy. Without verification, I can't let you on the plane. It's a liability issue for Transcontinental." "A liability issue?" Lena repeated the words, tasting like ash. "The liability I'm concerned about is the multi-billion-dollar merger my company is about to lose because your employee decided to play detective based on her personal biases." This information gave Garrett a moment's pause. A flicker of concern crossed his face. A billion-dollar merger was a different league of complaint than a missed vacation. But he quickly recovered, doubling down on the company line. "I understand you're upset," he said, his tone still maddeningly placid. "We can rebook you on the next available flight, which looks to be tomorrow afternoon. We might even be able to waive the change fee for you as a gesture of goodwill." The offer was so insulting, so tone-deaf, that Lena almost laughed. A gesture of goodwill. Waive the change fee. As if this were a simple misunderstanding, a minor scheduling snafu. "Tomorrow afternoon will be too late," Lena said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. She was done fighting. She was done explaining. They had made their decision. The meeting is at 10 a.m. Zurich time. There is no tomorrow afternoon. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that," Garrett said, though his expression conveyed no sympathy at all. He was simply waiting for her to accept defeat and leave. From the jet bridge, the senior flight attendant leaned out. "Garrett, we're all buttoned up back here. Are we getting another passenger or not? The captain's getting antsy about our takeoff slot." Garrett glanced at Lena one last time, a silent final offer for her to produce a magical verification out of thin air. Lena simply stared back, her eyes cold. "No, we're all set here," Susan Garrett called back. "Go ahead and close it up." He turned to Brenda. "Finalize the manifest." Brenda looked up at Lena, a flash of undisguised triumph in her eyes. She typed a few final keystrokes, and a printer whirred to life, spitting out the final paperwork. "Manifest is closed," she announced. The flight attendant gave a curt nod and pulled the heavy door of the jet bridge shut. The latch clicked into place with a sound of absolute finality. Flight 112 was officially leaving without Dr. Lena Holloway. The humiliation was complete. She was left standing in the nearly empty terminal, a pariah at the gate. The handful of remaining staff bustled around, avoiding her gaze, eager to wrap up and move on. She was yesterday's news. A problem solved. Brenda gathered her paperwork, organized it into a neat pile, and placed it in a folder. She looked up at Lena, who hadn't moved. "If you go back to the main ticketing counter, they can assist you with rebooking." Brenda said, her voice bright and chipper, the very picture of helpfulness now that her objective was achieved. Lena didn't respond. She just watched the woman. She watched the smug satisfaction in her posture, the casual cruelty with which she had wielded her minor authority. She had done this because she could, because she held a small amount of power and had found someone on whom to exercise it, someone she felt was undeserving. Lena finally broke her silence. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the air with chilling intensity. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said. Brenda simply shrugged a small, dismissive gesture. "I was just following procedure. Have a good night." She turned and walked away, disappearing through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Garrett gave Lena a final curt nod. "Ticketing is back in the main hall. They'll help you." Then he too was gone. Lena was alone. The silence of the terminal pressed in. Through the giant plate glass windows, she could see the plane, the very Airbus A330 she should have been on. The ground crew was pulling away the last of the equipment. Its lights blinked in the growing dusk, red, green, and white. It was a beautiful, powerful machine, and it was leaving her behind. She saw it begin to push back from the gate, its massive engines whining to life. A wave of despair washed over her, hot and suffocating. A decade of work, countless sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the risks, the relentless dedication that had brought her to this moment. All of it was about to be undone by the petty prejudice of a single gate agent. But as the despair crested, it was replaced by something else. A cold, clear, and unyielding resolve. They thought they had grounded her. They thought they had won. They were wrong. Transcontinental Airways wasn't the only way to get to Zurich. For a full minute, Lena stood motionless, watching as the tail of Transcontinental Flight 112 receded into the labyrinth of taxiways. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in her chest, but it was now being forged into something far more useful a plan. The despair was gone. The humiliation was being compartmentalized, filed away to be dealt with later. Right now, there was only the mission. She turned her back on the window and walked away from gate C26, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous, empty concourse. She didn't head back towards the main terminal or the ticketing counters as Garrett and Brenda had instructed. Instead, she found a quiet, deserted seating area, sat down, and pulled out her personal cell phone, a sleek, state-of-the-art device distinct from her work phone. She scrolled through her contacts to a name listed simply as Eva. She pressed the call button. It rang only once. "Go for Eva." A crisp voice answered, professional and alert, with the faintest trace of an Eastern European accent. "Eva, it's Lena," she said, her voice steady and controlled. "Are you still at Teterboro?" "Just finished pre-flight. We were scheduled to head back to San Jose in 2 hours. Why is the meeting over already?" Did they cave? Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was the primary hub for private aviation in the New York area. It was where Lena's jet, a magnificent Gulfstream G700 registered under a holding company that was a subsidiary of Veridian, was currently parked. "The meeting hasn't happened yet," Lena said. "And it won't unless we move fast. Change of plans, a big one. I need you to scrap the flight plan to San Jose." There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of typing. "Okay, scrapping it. What's the new destination, Zurich?" "ZRH," Lena said. "As soon as you can get a slot." Another pause, longer this time. Ava was no doubt processing the logistical gymnastics required for a transatlantic flight on a moment's notice. International flight plans, landing slots, customs arrangements, fuel calculations. It was a monumental task. "Zurich." Ava repeated, her voice betraying a hint of surprise, but no doubt. "That's ambitious, but doable. I can have us ready for wheels up in 90 minutes, maybe less. Getting a slot out of the New York corridor on a Friday night will be the trick." Where are you?" "That's the other thing," Lena said, a wry smile touching her lips for the first time that evening. "I'm not at Teterboro. I'm at JFK. JFK. Eva sounded genuinely confused now. "Why are you at JFK? I thought you took the commercial flight, because we had that unscheduled FMS software patch this morning and couldn't guarantee we'd be ready in time." "We'll call it a failure in public transportation," Lena said dryly. "Can you bring the plane to me? Bring a G700 to a commercial terminal at JFK, Lena. That's unorthodox. We'd have to go through a fixed base operator, one of the private terminals. I can't just pull up to gate C26. "I know. Get me the closest you can. I'll meet you there. File the flight plan. Tell them it's a medical tech priority flight if you have to, which isn't even a lie. Just get it done, Eva. Whatever it costs, just get it done." The captain's professionalism clicked back into place. The surprise was gone, replaced by a can-do efficiency that was precisely why Lena had hired her. "Understood. I'm on it. I'll text you the FBO information as soon as I have it confirmed. 90 minutes, Lena. Be ready." "I'm always ready," Lena said. "Oh, and Eva. One last thing. Name it. When you get your taxi instructions from the tower," Lena said, her voice dropping slightly, a glint in her eye that Eva couldn't see, "request a route that takes you past the international gates. Specifically, Concourse C. As close as you can legally get to the parking stand for transcontinental Flight 112. There was a beat of silence on the line. Eva Rostova was not just a pilot. She was perceptive. She didn't need the whole story to understand the implications of such a request. "Consider it a scenic route," Eva finally said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "See you shortly, Doctor." Lena hung up the phone. A sense of profound power surged through her, washing away the last remnants of the helplessness she had felt at the gate. Brenda and Garrett had taken away her boarding pass. They had closed a door on her. But they operated in a world of rules and procedures that Lena had long ago transcended. They thought they were the gatekeepers, but they were merely tending to one gate among many. She stood up, smoothed down her blazer, and picked up her carry-on. She now had a new destination, not gate C26, but the Shelter FBO on the other side of the airport. It was a world away from the crowded terminals and the condescending agents. It was a world of quiet lounges, personal service, and absolute control. A world where your ticket was the N number painted on the tail of your own aircraft. Brenda had tried to put her in her place. Lena was now about to show her what that place truly was. It wasn't in the back of the line. It was 50,000 feet above it, in the cabin of her own jet, streaking across the Atlantic towards a future Brenda couldn't even begin to imagine. Aboard transcontinental Flight 112, the mood was one of restless anticipation. The cabin was secured, the safety video had played, and the flight attendants had completed their final checks. Yet the Airbus A330 remained stubbornly attached to the gate. The initial pushback had stopped almost as soon as it began. In seat 14B, the impatient businessman who had been in front of Lena, a man named Henderson, grumbled to his seatmate. "What is it now? They rush you to board, and then you sit here for an hour. Ridiculous." In first class, the atmosphere was more serene, but the question was the same. The passengers, having settled in with their pre-departure champagne, were beginning to glance at their watches. On the flight deck, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain speaking from the flight deck. We do apologize for the delay. We're currently being held at the gate due to some unexpected ground traffic. It seems there's a priority departure being squeezed in. Air traffic control tells us it should only be another 10 to 15 minutes. We appreciate your patience." The announcement was met with a collective quiet sigh throughout the cabin. A priority departure, probably some politician or foreign dignitary. At gate C-26, Brenda Jenkins was finishing up her end-of-day paperwork. She felt a deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment. She had followed procedure. She had protected the airline from potential fraud. And more importantly, she had put that woman, Dr. Holloway, in her place. The arrogance of her claiming to be a CEO, expecting to be believed just like that. Brenda took a sip of her lukewarm coffee, a small smile playing on her lips. Justice in its small, bureaucratic way had been served. Garrett Vance had already signed off on her report, commending her for her diligence. "Good catch, Brenda," he'd said. "Better to be safe than sorry. You handled it by the book." Vindicated, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was then that she noticed the lights. Through the massive terminal windows, a new aircraft was moving slowly but purposefully across the tarmac. It was not a commercial airliner. It was a private jet, long and impossibly sleek, with a gleaming white fuselage and two powerful engines mounted near its high, T-shaped tail. Even from a distance, it radiated expense and exclusivity. Brenda recognized the model from the magazines she sometimes flipped through during her break. It was a Gulfstream, a new one. A G700, the top of the line, a $60 million mansion with wings. "Wow, look at that," her co-worker mumbled, pointing. "Someone important is in town." The Gulfstream didn't taxi towards the private aviation sector of the airport. Instead, guided by a ground vehicle, it made a slow, majestic turn and headed directly towards their area of the terminal. It moved with a silent, predatory grace that made the lumbering Airbus look like a plow horse next to a thoroughbred. Its destination became shockingly clear. It wasn't just passing by, it was parking. The jet maneuvered with incredible precision, its wingtip seeming to miss the wing of the transcontinental plane by mere feet, before coming to a perfect stop on the adjacent hardstand. A parking spot rarely used, but one that offered a flawless, unobstructed view from gate C-26 and from the entire right side of the Airbus. On-board Flight 112 passengers in the window seats were pressing their faces to the glass. "What's going on?" Henderson asked, craning his neck. "Why is a private jet parking next to us?" The cabin buzzed with speculation. The sight was unusual, a stark juxtaposition of mass-market travel and the pinnacle of private luxury. The Gulfstream just sat there, its engines humming with a quiet power, its presence utterly commanding. Its navigation lights pulsed in the twilight, a steady rhythmic beat. Back in the terminal, Brenda stared mesmerized. She watched as a set of air stairs elegantly unfolded from the jet's fuselage, touching the tarmac with a soft precision. The cabin door opened, spilling warm golden light onto the ground below. A black Lincoln Navigator, the kind used for VIP transport, pulled up silently beside the stairs. The driver got out and opened the rear passenger door, standing at attention. Everything was happening with a quiet, practiced efficiency that spoke of immense wealth and power. Brenda felt a pang of envy. That was another world, a world of people who didn't have to deal with security flags or officious gate agents. A world where the plane waited for you. The captain's voice came over the intercom on the plane again. "Well, folks, it appears our priority traffic is getting settled. Looks like we should be getting our clearance to push back any moment now. Thank you again for your patience." Brenda turned away from the window, dismissing the spectacle. It had nothing to do with her. She had a flight to close out. She picked up her folder and prepared to head to the operations center. The sight of the jet was a momenter, distraction, a brief glimpse into a life she would never know. She had her own world to manage her own small kingdom at the gate. And in her kingdom, she was the one in charge. The moment the air stairs locked into place, the interior of the Lincoln Navigator was illuminated. A figure emerged, stepping out onto the tarmac, with an unhurried grace that defied the urgency of her situation. She was wearing a tailored navy blue blazer and a simple silk shell. Her hair was styled in neat professional locks. It was Dr. Lena Holloway. From her vantage point at the gate, Brenda Jenkins froze mid-step. Her folder slipped from her grasp, papers scattering across the floor. Her brain struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. It was impossible. It was a hallucination. The woman she had just barred from her flight, the woman she had dismissed as a potential fraud, was now standing at the bottom of the stairs to a $60 million private jet. Lena didn't immediately board. Instead, she paused on the tarmac. She handed her carry-on to the waiting pilot, a tall, sharp-featured woman in a crisp uniform who greeted her with a nod. Then Lena turned. Her movements were deliberate, almost cinematic. She slowly raised her head and looked past the wing of her Gulfstream, her gaze traveling up the fuselage of the Airbus A330. She scanned the tiny windows, knowing that behind them passengers were staring out, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected drama on the tarmac. Then her eyes moved from the plane to the terminal. She scanned the massive plate glass windows of gate C-26 until her eyes found what they were looking for. She locked eyes with Brenda Jenkins. There was no malice in her expression, no anger, just a calm, unwavering, and utterly devastating look of acknowledgement. It was a look that said, "You tried to stop me. You failed. This is who I am. This is the world you are not a part of." In that single silent moment, Brenda's entire reality fractured. Every assumption she had made, every petty judgment she had passed came crashing down around her. The smug satisfaction she had felt just minutes before curdled into a sickening, icy dread. The woman wasn't a fraud. She wasn't some upstart trying to game the system. She was, in fact, so far beyond the system that she owned a better one. The $14,000 first-class ticket wasn't a stretch for her. It was a backup. It was an inconvenience. It was the equivalent of a billionaire taking the bus because his limousine had a flat tire. On board Flight 112, the revelation was dawning on those who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. Mr. Henderson, who had been craning his neck to see the spectacle, suddenly slumped back in his seat, his face pale. "I'll be damned," he whispered to his seatmate. "That's her. That's the woman they wouldn't let on the plane." The news spread through the cabin like wildfire. Whispers turned into excited chatter. Phones were raised with passengers, zooming in, trying to capture the unbelievable scene. The woman who had been publicly humiliated at the gate was now the star of a drama they were all watching from the cheap seats. They had pitied her, judged her, or simply ignored her. Now they looked at her with a mixture of shock, awe, and for some, a touch of shame. Lena held Brenda's gaze for a few seconds longer, an eternity in the silent space between them. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a final silent dismissal. Then she turned, ascended the stairs without a backward glance, and disappeared into the golden light of the Gulfstream's cabin. The pilot followed her in. The door hissed shut, sealing off the world of private luxury from the public display on the tarmac. A moment later, the jet's engine spooled up, the low hum rising to a powerful, piercing whine. Brenda was still frozen in place, surrounded by her scattered papers. Her co-worker was staring at her, his mouth agape. "Brenda, was that—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Brenda couldn't answer. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable. She looked from the pristine jet, now preparing for departure, back to the cumbersome Airbus, still sitting at the gate, filled with people who had all just witnessed her catastrophic misjudgment. She had followed procedure. She had done her job. But she had a horrifying feeling that she had just made the single biggest mistake of her career, and the consequences, like the sleek jet now taxiing away, were already in motion. As the Gulfstream G700 taxied onto the main runway, its powerful engines leaving the stationary Airbus in its wake, the fallout began. It started not in a corporate boardroom, but in the palm of 100 hands. Inside Flight 1-12, the cabin was electric. Passengers were no longer just talking. They were posting. A teenager in coach had filmed the entire scene, from Lena walking to the jet to her final look back at the gate. He uploaded it to TikTok with a trending sound and the caption, "They wouldn't let this woman on our flight, so she brought her own plane." A woman in business class, a freelance journalist, had already typed out a more detailed account and posted it to X, formerly Twitter. She tagged Transcontinental Airways. Absolutely unreal scene at Transcontinental JFK. Gate agent denies boarding to a black woman in first class. 10 minutes later, a literal private jet pulls up, and she boards it. Flight 112 to Zurich is still at the gate. What is your story? TCA. The posts went viral with breathtaking speed. The TikTok video hit 1 million views before Flight 112 had even received clearance to push back. The journalist's tweet was being retweeted thousands of times a minute. Flying. While Black # gatekeeper. Brenda and # transcontinental fail began to trend. The first official shockwave hit Garrett Vance's phone. He was in the Terminal Operations Center when his cell buzzed with a call from a number he recognized with a jolt of fear. Marcus Cole, the Vice President of North American Operations. Garrett answered with a shaky, "Mr. Cole." "Vance, what in the goddamn hell is happening at your terminal?" Cole's voice was a furious roar, distorted by the poor connection. "My phone is melting. The entire executive team is on a text chain that's about to spontaneously combust. Tell me why I'm seeing a video of a woman boarding a Gulfstream next to one of our planes that she was supposedly denied boarding on." Garrett's blood ran cold. "Sarai, there was an incident. A ticket was flagged for payment verification. The passenger couldn't provide it. We followed protocol." "Protocol," Cole shrieked. "Did your protocol involve checking if the passenger's name was Dr. Lena Holloway, CEO of Viridian Diagnostics?" Because their corporate travel manager just sent an email to our CEO Robert Milton personally, an email that CC'd their entire legal team, an email that informed him they are pulling their $7 million a year corporate account with us effective immediately. Does your protocol book mention that Vance Garrett felt like he couldn't breathe? Viridian Diagnostics. It wasn't a fake company. He could hear Brenda's smug, dismissive voice in his head. "Never heard of it." "So the gate agent, she was just being diligent." Garrett stammered a pathetic attempt to defend the indefensible. "Diligent," Cole shot back. "I'll tell you what's about to be diligent. Our legal department, when they're calculating the damages from the lawsuit that's about to be filed. Get that agent. Find her. Pull her off duty immediately. Both of you are to report to regional headquarters Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. And Vance, You better hope you have a damn good explanation, because from where I'm sitting, you and your diligent agent just cost this company millions and lit a public relations fire that we have no way of putting out." The line went dead. Garrett stared at his phone, his hand trembling. Meanwhile, Brenda had finally collected her scattered papers and was walking on numb legs towards the break room. Before she could reach the door, Garrett intercepted her, his face ashen. "Brenda," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "We have a problem. A very big problem." He quickly relayed the call from the VP. As he spoke, Brenda's face drained of all color. The smugness, the confidence, the sense of victory. It all evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. The woman's final words echoed in her mind. "You have no idea what you've just done." Now she was beginning to understand. Her world, built on the sturdy foundation of rules and procedures, was crumbling beneath her feet. She hadn't been a diligent employee protecting the company. She had been a bully who had picked the wrong target. She had kicked a hornet's nest, not realizing it was attached to a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Flight 112 finally pushed back from the gate, nearly an hour delayed. As it taxied towards the runway, it passed the spot where the Gulf Stream had been. The space was now empty. Lena's jet was already a silver speck climbing into the night sky, streaking across the Atlantic at a speed the Airbus could never match. She was on her way to Zurich, on her way to her future. And back at JFK, in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the terminal, Brenda Jenkins and Garrett Vance were left to face the ruins of theirs. The reckoning had begun. The story of what happened at JFK did not fade after a single news cycle. It became a case study in business schools, in corporate training seminars, and in the ongoing global conversation about systemic bias. For the key players, the consequences were life-altering. Lena's Gulfstream G700 touched down in Zurich with hours to spare. She arrived at her meeting not flustered or defeated, but with an aura of unshakable power. News of the incident had of course preceded her. The European Consortium executives didn't see a victim. They saw a woman who, when faced with an obstacle, simply charted a different path, one that involved her own private intercontinental jet. The story perversely enhanced her reputation. It demonstrated her resources, her resolve, and her refusal to be deterred. The merger was a resounding success. Viridian Diagnostics merged with the Swiss pharmaceutical giant, creating a new entity valued at over $40 billion. Lena, as a primary shareholder and a chief executive on the new board, saw her personal wealth and influence skyrocket. But she didn't forget what happened at Gate C-26. She pursued the matter with the same relentless precision she applied to her scientific research. Her legal team filed a lawsuit against Transcontinental Airways, not primarily for monetary damages, but for court-mandated institutional change. She demanded a complete overhaul of their customer service training, the implementation of a new third-party audited implicit bias program, and the establishment of a scholarship fund paid for by the airline for aspiring black pilots and aviation executives. She never spoke to Brenda or Garrett again. She didn't need to. The system she set in motion would be their reckoning. The airline was hemorrhaging. The viral videos were just the beginning. The story was picked up by every major news outlet. Celebrities and high-profile business leaders publicly announced they were boycotting the airline. Other corporations, reviewing their own travel policies and not wanting to be associated with the PR disaster, began to pull their accounts following Viridian's lead. The stock price for TCA plummeted by nearly 20% in a week, wiping out over $1 billion in shareholder value. CEO Robert Milton was forced to issue a cringe-worthy, deeply personal video apology. It was widely panned as too little, too late. Under pressure from the board of directors, he flew to San Jose to meet with Lena personally, an offer she declined, routing him instead to her general counsel. The airline ultimately settled the lawsuit, agreeing to every single one of Lena's terms. The cost of implementing the new training programs and the scholarship fund ran into the tens of millions, a fraction of the cost of their lost business and damaged brand. Garrett's meeting on Monday morning was short and brutal. He was not fired. In the cold calculus of corporate damage control, firing him would look like he was a scapegoat. Instead, he was demoted. Stripped of his managerial title and his public-facing role, he was reassigned to a windowless office in the airline's baggage claim logistics department at a regional airport in Nebraska. His career was over. He spent his days tracking lost luggage and processing damage claims, a ghost in the corporate machine he had so loyally served. He had to attend the very implicit bias training his actions had made necessary. During the seminars, he sat in the back, silent and grim-faced, a living cautionary tale for the new recruits. He had followed the book, but he had failed the fundamental test of human decency, and for that he was condemned to a purgatory of perpetual paperwork. Brenda was fired. Her termination was immediate and non-negotiable. She was the face of the scandal. Her name, her image, were plastered all over the internet. She became a meme, a symbol of petty tyranny and prejudice. She was doxxed, harassed, and universally reviled. She tried to find another job in the airline industry, but she was blacklisted. No carrier would touch her. The name Brenda Jenkins was radioactive. She tried other customer service jobs, but a simple Google search by any potential employer revealed the whole sordid affair. Within 6 months, unable to pay her mortgage, she had to sell her small suburban house. Her savings dwindled. She moved back into her parents' basement, the same room she had lived in as a teenager. Her life became an endless cycle of scrolling through hate-filled comments on old news articles about the incident, trapped in a digital prison of her own making. One evening, while watching the national news, a segment came on about the Holloway Helvetia Initiative, the scholarship program Lena had founded. The reporter was interviewing the first recipient, a bright-eyed young black woman who dreamed of being a pilot. I never thought it was possible, the young woman said, her smile beaming as she stood before a flight simulator. But because of Dr. Holloway, people who look like me are finally getting a chance to sit in the cockpit, not just get kicked out of the terminal. Brenda watched the screen, her face illuminated by the flickering light. There was the legacy of her actions, not just the ruin of her own life, but the inadvertent creation of a new generation of opportunities for people she had once judged as unworthy. She had tried to close a gate on one woman, and in doing so had opened a door for thousands. The karma was not just punishment, it was a profound and devastating irony. She turned off the TV and sat alone in the darkness. Dr. Lena Holloway's story isn't just about the epic clash on the tarmac. It's a powerful reminder that the biases people hold, whether in a boardroom or at an airport gate, can have consequences they cannot even begin to fathom. Brenda Jenkins thought she was enforcing a rule, but she was really just enforcing her own prejudice. And in doing so, she set in motion a chain of events that not only ruined her own life, but lifted countless others up through the Holloway Helvetia Initiative. It's a raw and real lesson in karma. It shows us that true power isn't about the small authority you can wield over someone in a moment of weakness. It's about the strength to rise above it, to turn an act of injustice into a force for positive change. What did you think of this incredible story of karma? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that prejudice should never be a barrier to success, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.